So, our last panel of the day is sponsored by Amdocs, and as you saw, the title is How Can Technology Help to Remove Barriers for Marginalised Communities? So, to my right, I've got Edith, who is Head of CR, Inclusion and Wellbeing and ESG at Amdocs, and Rana, who you just saw before.
Okay.
And she is, as Ezzy mentioned, the author of Girl Decoded and also Deputy CEO at Smart Eye. We've got Patricia, Lil Wave, who was also here earlier speaking about inclusion in Africa, and she is the CEO of WPP Scan Group. And Sharad, over there you go, CTO at Tata Transformation Services. And last but not least, Stefano, who is the EVP of Strategic Business Development at Mavenir. So, some wonderful panelists, and I'm very happy to welcome them today. So look, before we start, I just want to take a moment to define what we mean by marginalised communities. So what we mean in the context of the discussion we'll have today is those communities that are on the margins of society and they might have no voice or not have the resources to be heard. So that could be people in underdeveloped countries, in rural areas, elderly people. Or it could be those that face discrimination, for example, for race, for gender, or for sexual orientation. Now we know that technology is becoming more accessible, and that means more inclusion. There's still lots to do, however. So let's come to the questions. Now, Patricia, I'll start by asking you, what do you think are the biggest challenges for marginalised communities, and how can technology help to overcome this?
Thank you. I think marginalized communities have challenges from just basic living, if you start. I mean, in Africa where I'm from, water, for example, is as basic as that. Those are some of the challenges. But when we come to the new era of what we're doing, one of the biggest challenges is making sure that networks are actually reaching them. So when you look at a lot of the providers, they started first by focusing on urban and peri-urban, and I guess they figured that that is where the money is. So let's focus where the money is. But increasingly now, there is, and of course it was a bigger cost, as you can imagine, driving that technology base as you moved to more marginalized areas. But increasingly now, one of the biggest challenges is recognizing the only way you could develop everybody holistically is making sure that we remove that barrier in those areas and making sure they have access to network, especially mobile networks, more than anything else.
So Sharad, I'd also like to come to you to ask the question. I'll follow with Stefano. So what do you think are those biggest challenges for marginalized communities?
Yeah. So as rightfully mentioned by Patricia, this urban-rural divide is a big, big challenge for us. As an example, I'll talk about India, where we have 1.4 billion population. The teledensity today stands at 85% about, okay? But if I look at the urban teledensity, it's 134, and rural is 55%, okay? So this divide essentially is really a big challenge for us to bridge as such. Apart from that, it's not just about access and reach, but I think the affordability of the services and products, what we need to reach out to these communities, that's second. And thirdly, I think fundamentally, when we design a product or service, we don't keep the marginalized community as the center of a design process. That's the problem, right? They're only the users as a byproduct. Whereas they should be, if I use the term called taking from the cloud native, AI native kind of stuff, they should be marginalized native or the edge native, where I use the edge in terms of the communities are marginalized, right? So I think that this has to be solved at all the three levels of accessibility, affordability, and really being designed for marginalized communities. And I think the challenges what we have is not just the basic facilities about food, clothing, and shelter, but it's also about financial inclusion, okay? Another example I'll tell you. So in India, till about 7 to 8 years back, more than half of the households in the country did not have a bank account, okay? In the last 7 to 8 years, we have opened about 450 million bank accounts have been opened. And we thought these guys are poor guys. No. When the accounts were opened, today they have contributed $25 billion in these accounts. So bringing those guys into the mainstream economy is so very important. not just for them, but now they can contribute to the larger economy, right? So I think the financial inclusion, the social inclusion, the healthcare, education, etc., is also a big area for us to bridge for these marginalized communities. Yeah.
And Stefano, do you want to add anything?
Well, I live in the UK, but I feel the same pain because there are a lot of places which are not covered and you cannot reach it, so you're not alone. Apart from joke, I want to elaborate on a couple of concepts. The first one is, technology has always been used for communication and integration. And I think later we'll talk a bit more about other things and so on, so I don't want to divert from that. There have been a lot of steps in that space. There's no doubt about it. And it's about affordability of the technology, trying to address the specific needs. Yes, it's true. Operators in the sector tend to go and look where the money are because, of course, they have to make money. But I think there's been a relative good sensitivity trying to actually address these marginalized communities. So things have changed a lot compared to the past. And there are technology who are becoming much better in order to be deployed. And the other aspect, as I said, is integration. Because you can actually bring a technology to someone, but if you don't let them understand how to use it, it's just totally a waste of money. Yeah? And I use money just to make people understand what I mean. So it's a question of communication and integration, which is a key component that technology plays, in my opinion, in this specific role. So that's really the highlight, the specific aspect that I would like to underline in the technology. It's not just the telecom, it's just many other technology. The integration component is fundamental. They have to be integrated into the community, otherwise they are useless.
Thank you for that. That sets us up very nicely for the next few questions we have. So Edith, I'll come to you now. What do you think are the long-term consequences if we don't use technology to solve the challenges that we've just heard?
So first of all, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm super proud to be part of the mega diverse panel. So good job on that. So I think, a second before we are embracing metaverse and where technology is going, and all the dilemmas that we have within it. And I know we'll talk about COVID for sure because it's the aftermath of COVID, but I think that this has shown us more than any other times in history why technology is needed. Because when marginalized communities didn't know how to, shop their groceries, meet their doctors, speak with their families, because they didn't have the literacy, the right literacy, the adoption that you're talking about, the ability to use technology, this is where we realize that we need to accelerate the pace. And on the long term, and again, before we're going into where technology is taking us on the long run and the super strategic level, we need to make sure that on the basic it is. And we've seen it, and maybe I can give one example. Food insecurity, you were talking about what are the grand challenges that the world is facing. Food insecurity, unfortunately, is one of them. One way to solve it is to donate food, and it's super valid, and obviously we're all engaged in it, or should be, and it's super relevant. But for example, in Amdocs, our volunteers built an amazing solution, technological solution, that actually connected food surpluses to people with food insecurity. Now, this is how technology can take us into a more sustainable and scalable way. Instead of us donating or other people donating food, packages of food, the ability for people to use technology in order to get something that they need. So for me, when I'm looking on the long run, these are exactly the points in time where we say it's not just for the workplace environment. It's just really starting from the basics of the basics. You cannot be a functioning citizen in this developing world without this.
Thank you for that. And Rana, I'll come, same question for you. What do you think those long-term consequences are?
I love the food bank marketplace, by the way. That's a great use.
Yeah, we did it in Mexico, and I have to say that we were amazed. In less than a year, 500,000 people got food
amazing.
without anyone buying food or investing in
That's
it.
incredible.
And yeah, and it's amazing. It's a group of volunteers that just use their skills for that. So thank you.
So I mean, there are amazing examples of how technology can help us scale impact, right, and scale inclusion. I do worry, though, that if we're not intentional and thoughtful about how we build this, we can accidentally build bias into these systems. So I'll give you an example, kind of building up on the automotive use case. So we work with 14 of the largest car manufacturers in the world. And these car manufacturers are global, right? Their cars are everywhere in like every corner of the world. So one particular luxury OEM based in Germany, not to be named, they once sent us some videos and they said, test those videos on your technology and if you pass, we'll pay you and we can integrate you into the car. So we took a look at the videos and it was literally their team. So it was young, blonde, blue-eyed men. And at the time, we were a very small company and we could have just made the decision to test the videos, we would have passed with flying colors, gotten paid, gotten integrated, end of story. And I remember saying, this is wrong. Like this data is not representative of their drivers, of their consumers, of their buyers. And so we sent the data back. We were taking a risk with this partnership, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. So we sent the videos back and we said, this is very non-diverse. And we spent a good year and lots of money essentially building a much more diverse data set that looks like everybody here and here. And I think we just need more companies to hold that higher bar and be very intentional about the data we're collecting and how we're training and validating these AI algorithms. Because on the one hand, they scale very quickly, and that's great. But it's also a mirror of the biases that exist in society. And if we're not careful, we can just exponentially multiply these biases. So,
No, that's very, very true. So thank you for those answers. Now, everyone in the room will also know that technology played a huge role in the pandemic. So my next question, and Patricia, I'll come to you because I know you're, as well as Patricia's day job, she is a board member of the Vodafone Foundation, who do a lot for inclusion and technology. So my question is, in terms of technology during the pandemic, what role do you think it played?
Huge role, actually, because suddenly technology, which was a luxury, became an absolute necessity. From basics of education, people going to school, to the top end of corporates and people working, it suddenly became an absolute fundamental. If you didn't have the right technology, your world stopped. So when I look at a lot of things that a lot of governments perhaps were even trying to push on the continent, more virtual education, more technical-based curriculums, suddenly overnight that had to happen, even if it was just virtual to begin with. And with doing that, the bigger thing was, can everybody access that education? Because suddenly if you don't, you're creating a huge gap again, and losing all the inroads you'd made on educational goals and everything else. So I think for me that was big, big, big. The pandemic, people say, it was a bane, but there was a lot of opportunities that it presented. I was sharing the example of the e-commerce that grew in a lot of markets because of technology, because of the pandemic. And technology was not high-end platforms. It was simple things like Instagram and WhatsApp and all those things, supported, of course, by mobile solutions and all the gig economists who suddenly came up and were able to make a livelihood because that became a way of life. Absolutely incredible. But when we talk about even marginalized communities, they have been living that life long before. So if you look at one of the biggest initiatives, one of the initiatives of the Vodafone Foundation was the Instant Network Schools, which had already recognized that there are people who sit on the fringes, who may not have the infrastructure, sitting in refugee camps. How do we make sure those people, both adults, children, wind up getting the education. And one of the bold things that Vodafone, in conjunction with UNHCR, did was making sure, for example, Dadaab, which is the biggest refugee camp in northern Kenya, everybody got the education, a proper technologically based education. And I was sharing earlier, one of the most powerful things I saw was seeing all these young girls in the middle of nowhere, refugees, they don't have a livelihood, they don't have a home, but they were coding, they were building websites. It is absolutely one of the most powerful things I think I have seen to date. Yeah.
Well, that's a wonderful image that I have in my mind. Sharad, I'll also ask you the same question about the role that technology played during the pandemic.
Yeah, it was a huge, huge role. And initially, when pandemic hit, everybody was concerned what will happen in India. Okay, again, 1.4 billion people in a country which is 1/4 of the size, 1/8 of the size of US and 4 times population. So you can see a density being so high, right? I think the technology we used to run the vaccination program, that was a big. This was a completely digitized, automated vaccination program. And today we have administered around 2 billion plus doses to the population, right? So things could have been much worse had it not been for the kind of platforms we developed for administering that. Secondly, also in terms of the direct benefit transfer, a lot of people lost jobs during pandemics, okay? And that is where the government stepped in. But again, how do we really transfer the cash assistance to these people without the pilferage, without the value negation during the process? There's a huge plan which I mentioned earlier about opening of the bank accounts. So with one click of a button, you can imagine almost all the country which needs to get the money could get transferred, okay? And for the last 2.5 years, this money is getting transferred to the rural people, to the underprivileged people, to the poor people very regularly, right? So I think technology played a huge role. And just closer home to my own company, Tata Communications Transformation Services, for Vodafone India, we run the entire field operations for them in India, okay? And about 300,000 kilometers of fiber. And we had about 15,000 feet on the ground who were 24/7 manning and operating and maintaining these networks. Now, how do you train them? How do you really make them aware of what social distancing, how do you really take care of themselves, their families and all? We developed a platform which could do a remote audits, which could do a remote video analytics based on which we can figure out somebody is following or being non-compliant to the distancing and the other norms. So I think technology had a huge role to play as far as I see from my vantage point at office and at work. Yeah.
So if we continue on that theme of the power of technology and that role it plays, Stefano, do you think that technology is enough? Is there something else that we need as well as technology to get to where we want to have that full inclusion of those marginalized communities?
Of course, the answer is yes, we need something else. Technology by itself is never enough to be able to do something. The first aspect, I think, has been somehow already mentioned, are financial tools and so on, because we need to remember that technology has traditionally a long horizon for return of investment, both in financial terms and in educational integration steps. We have burned so much technology by trying to have results and profit in all sense, again, not just financial, within like 6 months, 1 year. Tons of technology has been burned because of that. Okay, so we need a bit more time. So we need financial tools that allow us to get a bit of a longer horizon. I mean, pandemic has revealed that our society is extremely running on a very thin ice. A lot of companies in 6 months, they got burst because of pandemic. It really means we don't look forward enough. And when we explain, there's another topic that I think is important with technology, and there is a very old joke that I used to use as well when I was in old technology, very appropriate with this. I'll make it very short because we don't get much time. But the point is fundamental. If between here and Australia, let's say, the other side of the hemisphere, we'll be able to find that technology means to transfer things in, the speed of light on whatever, a lot, enormous amount of data, the main question would be, the local Aborigine person, local person, and myself, what do we have to talk about? So education, mindset, integration, as I talked before, is a fundamental component. We can have all the technology we want, but if we don't have anything to talk about and to aggregate with, it's again is a useless thing. And this one is a bit more complicated because in my, well, now I need to say 30 years, unfortunately, in telecom, the biggest barrier has always been the mindset of the people. In transformation, in changes, you know, the mindset of the people is the most difficult to change, and they is the most resistant. And that's where transformation takes a longer time, is because people, not because of technology. So there is a lot more. And there are some other factors, but I think these two factors, financial tools intended as a longer time to return, and education and mindset, for me, are the most important that needs to be added. Because even if you have a fully connected world, you won't resolve marginalized community problems if you don't have the education to do so.
Can I add one more to your list?
Yeah, please.
So I think leadership too, like each of us, whatever our positions are, I think we have an opportunity to take a seat at the table, use your voice when you have that seat at the table, and then create more seats for other people, right? Invite, you know, underrepresented individuals to be at that table. I think that's so important.
And can I add another one to the list?
Communication is the biggest barrier
Yeah.
to success in interrelationship. You know, a lot of marriages and communication, they all fail because of communication. You know, that's we need to remember that. Communication is so powerful and needs to be really before anything else.
And I want to add to the list because, and I think we're creating a pretty good list here, but I think that, you know, first of all, I'm happy to say that absolutely no, we can't have only technology, and I think we all agree on that. I think that on top of what you said, partnerships that connect the dots, because having great technology, great integration, we have the education, we have the awareness, we have the literacy, but we need to work together, and I think that this is, you know, a lot of what we're doing here and everyone here in the crowd, and this is what brought us here, to make sure that we are working together to address these, you know, challenges and opportunities that we have.
So then, in that spirit of working together, we've got just under 4 minutes left. So you can see the faces in the room here. So my question is, in 30 seconds each, can you tell the room what they can do tomorrow, the next day, to help address all of these things that we've talked about? What can everyone in the room do? So Ida, I'll come to you first, and we have 30 seconds each, otherwise I'll be in trouble.
You just won the fastest speaker in the room. And it was mentioned a few times throughout the day. All of us, we make on average 35,000 decisions every day, most of them unconscious. We are not aware of them. Please be aware, more aware of the decisions that you make, that unconscious bias is not dictating or ruling your behaviors and your decisions, and this will take us for sure to a better place.
I would say be a door opener, create opportunities for people who may not have access to these opportunities if it weren't for you. It can be small things like giving credit to people on your team, to championing people on your team, inviting them to executive meetings where maybe they would not have been invited otherwise. So yeah, be the chief opportunity officer.
I love it.
I think for me is that a lot of the people in the room here have a lot of connections, a lot of networks. So if, you know, in Africa there's something, one of our greatest luminaries used to say, what is your little thing? So don't ask to do big things, but if you just do one thing to connect one person, to speak about one opportunity, to open one particular door, to reduce one unconscious bias, to connect, I think we're going to make a big difference.
Yeah. So for me, I'll summarize in 4 words. What I see is the technology has to get digitized, so subject to digitization. It has to be commoditized. It has to be democratized. It has to be socialized. right? The last word, socialize, is all about training and teaching and digital literacy, which you also referred to about. So if all of us can probably pick up in our neighborhood and our friends and family circles to see how we can make them more comfortable to live in with technology. And I'll just take 10 seconds more, Shivani. There's a startup in India which has been launched recently called Good Fellows. And that's a platform which is meant to be a buddy pairing between senior citizens, right, who are retired people, and young college volunteers, right? So not just about sharing emotions with those people and hearing out their stories, but these guys are also making them more comfortable with the new age technology and so on and so forth. So my call to action would be how do we get more people involved and comfortable with technologies?
Well, first you heard, don't go in a place which is not connected, don't live there. But apart from joke, because we are technology people here,
Yes.
we deal with technology. When you deploy technology, think about it, think how it is used, think how that is deployed. Just don't think how many megabit per second does, just think what you can do with it. And the second thing is, open your mind, guys. When it's time for change, for dynamic, you need to be bold. Don't think about what you've done in the past. Think what great things you can do in the future.
So that will conclude our panel, our last panel of Arch Summit 2022. Thank you to Amdocs for sponsoring. Thank you to all of you for being here. And I hope that you will take some of those actions and make them real tomorrow. So please give them a round of applause. Thank you to all of them for joining, and thank you to all of you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.